The American Teilhard Association podcast features conversations and interviews which explore the life, thought, and vision of mystic scientist Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. We express our gratitude to Dalesford Abbey in Paoli, Pennsylvania, for allowing us to use their space and equipment in making this episode possible. Jason Willits was deployed with the U.S. Army to the highways of Iraq 1 year after the invasion, the Battle of Fallujah, and the Abu Ghraib scandal. He was also deployed to Afghanistan at the start of the largest special operations mission since Vietnam, training and arming the Afghan Local Police in 2011. Jason is currently developing resilience training for AmeriCorps through the Delaware State Office of Volunteerism while completing a Master's of Theology degree through his Antiochian Orthodox Archdiocese. Jason, welcome. So good to have you with us on the podcast today.
Thank you, Andrew. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. For those of you who are new to the podcast, welcome. We are in our 7th episode, and we've had great guests so far, so I'm really looking forward to today's interview. Jason was kind enough, as a member of the American Teilhard Association, to submit a written piece to our last edition of the Teilhard Perspective. So be sure to check that out. It's called Reflections on Nostalgia for the Front, and our interview today is really going to get into a bit of the content of that interview, but more importantly, we get to know Jason and we get to know his journey to coming to know Teilhard. So, Jason, how and when did you and Teilhard first meet?
Teilhard's name continually came up in my readings, and that is the best I can offer. Paul Shepard, Thinking Animals, was probably the first time I'd come across his name, and for those of you who aren't familiar, Paul Shepard studied at Yale, taught at Yale. His primary focus was analyzing how human cognition develops in reference to other organisms, animals specifically.
Sure.
And his little bit about Teilhard caught my eye. I thought, oh, that's interesting. At the time, I was also reading Robert Wright's Non-Zero, The Logic of Human Destiny. And again, Teilhard comes up and seems like this interesting mind I want to explore a little further. Picked up Divine Milieu at some point prior to my second tour, and then for whatever reason, I was in University of California, Berkeley, outside of Berkeley campus. And if you're going to find Teilhard anywhere, it's probably in Berkeley, right?
Sure.
So we were at a red light, and there was a used bookstore, and stuck in traffic, and I told the people I was with, hey, go around the block. I'll be back out by the time you get here. And went and found The Future of Man and The Phenomenon of Man there in that bookstore. So dove through those throughout that summer. That would have been 2012, and was just amazed at his vision.
So when you went into the bookstore, were you looking for something in particular, or those titles just
the name
out to you?
just
the
any
name.
Okay.
I
know for whatever reason I just have a feeling that there will be some Teilhard in this bookstore. Lo and behold,
there you go,
right there
in Berkeley, California.
As
you know, as a center of has been known as center of progressive thinking, I guess you would say. Sometimes, more outside the box thinking, right, comes out of that area. So it would be appropriate to find Teilhard. I had the pleasure of presenting at a conference back in 2018, and it was in just north of Big Sur, and it was a psychological conference. But the first 3 keynotes all mentioned Teilhard within their talks, and I was like, where else but California would you find this, right? So,
in sort of preparation for this, looking back through the 20 years of 250 so nonfiction titles I've devoured, I came across 12 at least that have indexed Teilhard right there, go into his thinking, and I mean, if a name comes up often enough like that, you should probably look into it.
So then at what point did you really start to crack open this person and his vision and get into the meat of it?
I think reading the Divine Milieu, recognizing his terminology specifically, milieu being something that is both surrounding you from the outside as well as something that's sort of inflating from the inside in a way, right? One of the books that I had read prior that does mention Teilhard that I must have overlooked was Ken Wilber's No Boundary.
Sure.
114 pages of that dissolving of self to focus on relationship of self to other.
Sure.
Step by step.
Yeah.
I had read that during Iraq. I know that. But for whatever reason, Teilhard didn't catch me. But when I read Divine Milieu, that same idea, his idea of divine God, internal and external, surrounding, compressing.
That's right.
That blending, the division line blurs. I immediately thought this is just what Ken Wilber was trying to articulate.
Sure.
And it was written 70 years prior, 50 years prior, whatever it was, probably.
And Teilhard's thought has that ability to be plugged into different ways of systematic thinking, right? Because it is so systematic in itself, and it resonates with so many universal themes that a lot of these forward thinkers, especially bigger thinkers, Wilber's talking about holons, right? The big hole and the little holes that make up the big hole and all the stuff. It's inevitable they cross paths at some point, right? So now you've mentioned here a couple times about tours, second tour, but then a first tour in Iraq. So as a former military service member, that sounds like, the milieu in your life in which you encountered Teilhard, right?
I think that in reading more about particularly his letters from the front in preparation for that essay and some of the work that I'm helping out with now, I find a similarity that if you're put in a position where you feel like this month or this week or tomorrow I might die, I should probably figure out this meaning of life thing. So that was really my attitude from the moment I got notification. So I was a National Guard soldier. In 2004, we were notified. So it's basically you're put on alert. Hey, guess what? At some point in the future, you will be mobilized for war.
Right.
I said, okay. And at the time, I was working as a bookseller at Borders, rest in peace, and enjoying book culture, and decided, okay, I need to really start reading some of these things that if it weren't potential life and death within the next year, I'd probably just put it off.
Yeah.
I'll read it next year. I'll read it when I'm old and retired and, safe in my bed, I suppose. And I think in reading his letters to his cousin, I see some of the same theme of a need to dig deeper and put it all together for an audience.
Yeah.
And I think that was really where my addiction for nonfiction really started.
Okay.
I mean, that's where it really took off. Even if it wasn't probably another 4 years before I registered Teilhard's name in other books and then came to Teilhard, I'm seeing similarities in that motivation.
Sure. Absolutely. And like I opened the podcast with, Jason submitted an article to the current edition of Teilhard Perspective, where he kind of juxtaposes, more really compares Teilhard's experience in combat with his own. And that's something that I would encourage all of our listeners and viewers to check out. So today's episode is maybe just going to give you a little taste of, some of the more hearty content that you can find in Jason's reflections, and as he, draws out of Teilhard his own reflections. I would encourage all of our listeners and viewers to check that out. So there's a lot that is intermingled here between your military service and I would imagine your own personal growth that's occurring over these years, right? Discovering Teilhard, feeling this sense of urgency to find meaning, be of purpose. I don't know. These are my words I'm putting to this sense that you're communicating now, right?
Yeah.
But you're finding a similarity within Teilhard. So just to go back to you for a second, what inspired your call to military service?
My uncle dropped off some recruiting pamphlets when I was a 6-year-old boy, I suppose. He had served. He lived, within a block, small town. My grandfather served in World War II and was in part of the American Legion. Every year, we, on Memorial Day, it was always a big part of the American Legion, the Boy Scout troop, and the Cub Scout troop would all march to the cemetery, have a 21-gun salute, read off the names. And as a way to start your summer, that always seemed like, for me, you're just coming out of school and it was a moment to pause. I think that's the timing of Memorial Day is meant for that. I think it's great. It's hey, before you put all your responsibilities away and go and have fun this summer, how about we reflect on some of the heroes that have defended the Constitution of the United States against any enemy, foreign and domestic. Service has always been just a part of what I felt I was called to do as a Christian, as a young boy. And so I dreamt of being a hero, and I thought that putting on a uniform and facing that would be the most likely way to earn that status symbol, I suppose.
I mean, you were, a 6-year-old boy, you said? Right?
Yeah, the recruiting pamphlets probably came about then. Doing the math, I think about that same time, I have a very profound memory of Lee Greenwood singing "God Bless the USA" and hearing his anthem of standing up next to those who stood before. And I thought, wow, that's what I'm going to do. I came home from first grade, and I told my mother I'm not going to school anymore. And my mother, being my mother, said, "Oh, really? Where did this come from?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to join the Army anyway." Didn't see the point. She said, "No, you have to finish high school at least." And I was destroyed. But all of that, thinking a little further, really I think it came down to the fact that when you graduate from kindergarten to first grade, you don't get to play with the toy train after lunch anymore. They didn't have any toy trains in first grade, and I saw my whole adult life ahead of me, and I said, no, I'm not wanting to do that.
The injustice,
I know. I need to get out of here right now and go have adventures playing war instead, right?
Well, like I said, as a 6-year-old boy, it's like you want to be a cowboy, an astronaut, a soldier, right? It's only logical. Yeah.
So, and Short Circuit too. I'm dating myself here, but I do recall that came out, and that I Need a Hero who, whatever song in the 80s, it was real popular. Very end, he's like putting himself back together, and he's driving, and I was like, wow, that's a hero. I need to be a hero.
So that was the beginning. That was the beginning of Jason the Soldier.
That was the start, yep.
And eventually, like you said, you were, as a National Guardsman, mobilized to Iraq. So you faced what only those who have, been in combat, whether they are, service people or just have had the circumstances in their life put them there, right? Because that's their home country or whatever. You've experienced what Teilhard describes as the front, right? Now, this is something that, again, I will encourage our listeners to go and read Jason's article for sure. But Teilhard describes the front within his reflections, Nostalgia for the Front, where he's reflecting on his experience and his service in World War I. And that was an experience unlike any other. This is something that Jason and I have talked about. It's a reflection on how the human psyche has grown since that time of World War I, where Jason has said to me that, he watched Vietnam movies and stuff growing up, right? We see World War II movies, Saving Private Ryan, right? We've seen that Omaha Beach scene, right? Where it's just hell on earth. But that's through the eyes of a screen, right? And a director, and these are actors, and these are not real bullets, and this is not real blood, and people aren't actually dying. But that is, an encapsulation, a depiction of what is reality for some people. So Teilhard experienced that in a way that was really new, where he couldn't watch Vietnam movies. He didn't know what World War II was because he was in World War I. And within World War I, we had machines of war start being used, some limited chemical warfare too, I think, right? So this was much different from what the human psyche had experienced and known warfare to be. And then here he finds himself in the middle of this. And this is what we describe as the front, right? So that's just my, watered down description as a civilian of what the front is through others' eyes. But Jason, how do you describe the front?
So I think for him, the front literally etched into the ground. He saw the future of mankind. He saw two rival armies that would carry the future of humanity forward in one way or another, depending upon the actions of the men in those trenches. In nostalgia for the front, I think the hypersensitivity, there's a rush to the immediacy of war that you can't get anywhere else. And so I think that draws almost anybody who's experienced it back to it.
Sure.
You hear about people who have undergone traumatic events in their own individual lives. And wow, that was kind of the most alive I felt for that moment.
Sure.
I wish I could remember where the quote comes from, but a common saying is, I wish I were back there so that I could wish I were coming home again. Right? It's this, you can't help but idealize the civilian life waiting for you if you survive.
Sure.
And at the same time, you can't recognize that you will never have the adrenaline spike or the immediacy in everything you do being all about a team and all about that team's survivalist future.
It all matters.
There is no small. There's no small task. It is, I will have everything as perfectly pristine, packed, prepared, everything possible, because inevitably chaos is going to happen.
Right.
And when it happens, I need as much time to be able to react to it as possible. When you're in your nice, comfortable civilian life, it's easy to just put it off. I will organize, I will prep, I will plan, I will study, I will prepare myself at a later time. Right now, this entertainment is more important. War cuts through all of that and says, nope, you don't get entertainment. Sorry, guess what? You only can prepare. That's the only thing you can possibly do. And if you make it out, great.
Yeah.
I think the front that we face today is very much a spiritualization of what Teilhard saw there in World War I.
Now, do you mean the front in terms of warfare or in terms of consciousness?
I think the front that Teilhard saw, we can see in our everyday.
Yeah.
Whether we've been to war or not.
Sure.
In our consciousness, in our development, in our future, in the future of man. War makes it very easy to cut out everything that's not essential. Living a civilian life, comfortable, well-fed, some futurist plans that you have kind of in the works towards
vacations,
your next goals, your immediate goals, your midterm goals of finishing school or new career or whatever else, or retirement, what I want to be when I retire, all that stuff. You feel like you have all the time in the world to finish it. I think that approaching those goals instead from the lens of a soldier, the lens of an immediacy of life or death, can bring out that vitality that Teilhard mentions in nostalgia, and that soldiers often feel nostalgia for the front, that vitality of, I'm going to achieve my goal eventually. I have faith that will happen. I have to prepare now, and my goal is important for the future of humanity, for the impact it will have.
Right.
You have to dig a lot deeper, but the importance and the immediacy and the vitality itself are all still there in your civilian world. Mm-hmm. And so I think that if we reshift our focus to that being the front, sort of how do we get over the mundane of today and find the motivation to really liven myself up to do whatever I can now so that when fortune smiles upon me in the future, I will be prepared.
Sure. It sounds to me like what you're describing is being ultra-human.
I think that, yes.
I would imagine that Teilhard's experience in combat really formed that concept for him. Even I would have to look at the dates to see like when he first penned that phrase, right, ultra-human. But I'm curious what its correlation to combat is, because I mean, I would imagine you've seen some ultra-human things.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I do believe that he does use that phrase at least once so far in the letters that I've read.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
From his tour. Something that I think really draws me to Teilhard to begin with, along the lines of that ultra-human, is that it's not an ultra-human at the expense of other, or an ultra-human through the amalgamation of the control system, system of government or system of spirituality.
Right.
That you can.
I just want to move this here a little bit for you.
Good idea.
Or we could take it off too if it's problematic, but
just kind of dipping. It is easy to say, I'm going to become an ultra-human by giving of myself to the masses. I'm going to defend my constitution against all enemies, both foreign and domestic, and become a part of the military, and sort of, I no longer matter as an individual because I'm a part of this greater ultra-human machine of humans.
Where there's a loss of sense of self to a degree, right?
Right.
Okay.
The other extreme would be I'm such an ultra-human that I become a narcissist, much like some of the personalities that you see floated around as some ideal to look up to.
Right.
Teilhard tried to make it as clear as possible, in my opinion, that it is only through you and I coming together as unique individual humans and individual persons that our differentiation can really be expressed.
Sure.
It can really be fleshed out. It can really be celebrated. We don't dissolve either of the individuals. We become a super person or a trans unit of relationship of two very unique individuals that can only recognize their uniqueness through communication with the other.
Right, through their unity.
Right.
Through what brings them together, holds them together, right? This is what Teilhard's language of finding that Christ in all is always getting at, right? In who all holds together.
I was just going to mention, I am a practicing Orthodox Christian, having explored all the other alternatives because of that very thing. I don't see another tradition in the world that balances the celebration of the individual within the community without the sublimation, the forcing one to be
sublimate,
to shove it under, we're going to either prioritize our communal identity or we're going to prioritize our individual identity. Near the two shall meet.
Yeah, because that's definitely a challenge within finding a faith community, right? Where it's like, to what degree will they accept my authenticity? And to which degree is my authenticity truly my authenticity? And is it not a reflection of self? And then there's like the middle ground of self-reflection and then communal interaction, right? But it's a very, very real question. I think it's a very real challenge, not just for the individual today, but for communities, right? I mean, especially within the United States, things tend to be so heavily politicized, and that translates directly into church as well. So you have, in some cases, a real loss of that sense of the Christic, right, and who all holds together. And it's more like, what is holding us together? And is it this kind of agenda, or, this mindset, right, where it's, I'm going to use these terms just very vaguely, but, more progressive or traditional or, liberal, whatever you want to call it, right? We get into the habit of making that be what holds us together. And it's no longer that higher identity that we have in our union, which creates this sense of differentiation where we have a new discovered sense of self-identity. And that's not just within the individual, you're saying, that's also within the community too.
Right.
Yeah.
And I like especially what you said there with regards to the finding the Christic.
Mm-hmm.
I can't emotionally connect with a human. I can't emotionally connect with an it. I can't. Martin Buber and I and thou kind of goes into this a bit, and I know Teilhard touches on
like
it a
a
lot.
Subject versus an object.
I can only be in communion with a person,
right,
with a unique name, unique identity, unique differentiation of what makes them who they are, what makes them special. Mm-hmm. I can't connect to a cause necessarily, or I won't find as much fulfillment if I attempt to. I can label myself as X, Y, or Z.
Right.
I can label this ego as these labels and differentiations and things that may have been a part of my life. And it makes it easier to label, and it makes it easier to then identify with a group and feel I connect to that group.
Right.
But you don't connect to a group. You connect to individuals within that group.
Yes. Yeah.
It has to be personal, or you just cannot. We're just wired that way.
Yeah, it's more than just, like discussing the interest at hand, right? You start to get to know that person's name. You start to get know a little bit about their background. Maybe they have family, right? Maybe they just moved. It's so much more complex than just narrowing it down to an issue or like a mindset or something like that.
And think of the difference in which you connect to a story versus a list of facts.
Yeah, exactly.
You can read all the facts about anything that happened at all, period. But if you hear it from a story, or hear the story behind it, hear the drama within it,
sure,
all of a sudden now you have something you connect to as a person. I think that Teilhard's omega point, Teilhard's vision of Christ being the center in which all things are held together, and the Orthodox journey of theosis and ideal goal of, through Orthodox practice, I build the habit of being Christ to every person I meet, and seeing Christ in every person I meet.
Yeah.
Suffering. Bam. Now we have a like terminology, a like-minded goal, a like something that we can work together through our relationship. And during that journey, I as an individual might cling to certain things that later on in my life I'll have matured and discard.
Right. That's right.
I can't identify with any of those things that I carry with me with any accuracy and think that somehow that's the be-all, end-all definition of who I am. But if I have a goal that will take a lifetime for everybody, no matter what,
right,
and I can be a more and more Christ-like person today than I was yesterday, and I can look back at 14 years of putting this into practice and see a much more Christ-like person on average outside of the grocery store.
Traffic.
Right, or traffic, so that journey itself is going to take everybody a lifetime anyway. And if you and I as strangers come together and we both, for whatever reason, are influenced to recognize Christ in each other and to be Christ to each other, we help each other along that journey, we can discard everything else.
Yeah.
We're given an ideal. The Hebrew term for sin is hamarta, I believe, and it's to fall short. So for the Hebrew people, it was, here's your 10 Commandments, live according to Deuteronomy, live this lifestyle, and falling short of that is sin. There's your ideal, master that. Okay. Well, as a Christian, I'm given Christ as my ideal.
Right.
I fall short of that every day. Man, but that gap, hopefully, throughout my life,
Yeah.
I can close that gap just a little bit.
Yeah.
Just a little bit more every day. And find my truest self.
Sure.
Or the best I can hope to embody as my truest self.
Yeah, that's the word that was coming to me, was embodiment, because you started off this discussion with talking about how within the divine milieu, it triggered a sense of within yourself there's this connection to God, yet totally outside of you and all around you this connection is happening too, right? And those may be my words for what you said, but that similar concept. And that seems to be, what Teilhard was really drawn to in his study of the Eastern Fathers as well. So, it's interesting, through your faith, you've found that particular way to express this connection that you have to Teilhard's thought in that way. And I think that the example you were just using too of like falling short, right? It's like, in my mind, it's kind of like a ladder or something like that. And it's not linear, though. It goes more to that all-encompassing description that you had started with. And I understand what you're talking about, falling short. And it's almost like I've not embodied Christ to the best that I could today, or something like that, as opposed to I've embodied Christ. And are we the arbiters of that judgment? Probably not, right?
I mean, how many feet have you washed it?
Yeah.
That's really, somebody comes up and says, well, are you a Christian? And you better say, okay, well, are you a Christian? Right. Your answer better be, I don't know, do you have a washpan?
Yeah.
Take off your shoes. We'll see.
I like the quote from St. Oscar Romero. You say you love the poor, name them.
Yeah. That's a great one. I haven't come across that.
Yeah. So you do a really wonderful job of describing that sense of the front, that Teilhard experience, that you experience, that we are all called to experience as human persons, as a part of this organism, right? Mm-hmm. Would you say that was what Teilhard's military service, or at least his description of it, had most in common with yours?
No.
Okay.
I think that the only things that Teilhard's military service and mine had in common are probably the interior growth that he and I went through. I think that in 1900 years, I'm sorry, 900 years, war has evolved so much that what we fight today and what we fought in World Wars I and II are different universes.
Yeah.
I would say that my front was actually contracted out through Halliburton. I would say that KBR, Third Country Nationals, made up 3 or 4 drivers for every one military driver there was. We babysat them, we took care of them. The U.S. Army and all volunteer force can't handle the logistics that an army actually needs if it has a war that is against the Constitution of the United States and somewhat of an emergency. And,
Sure.
So we augmented that in the 90s at Gulf War I, while I can remember, for whatever reason, watching Newsweek. I got a Newsweek article during the first Gulf War, and like they had how their soldier had set up his kit.
Okay.
And I immediately went and I tried to make sure that I had all that gear. I want to make sure my kit was dead on accurate. In '91. So about that same time, the Secretary of Defense contracted to Halliburton, said, here's $8.7 million, figure out how we are going to interweave defense private contractors into the U.S. Army.
Right.
To conduct war.
So as opposed to a more global effort, like in World War I, this was a more, what's the word I'm looking for? Lobbied corporate initiative, in a way.
Seems to be. I don't recall during either Gulf War or either the Operation Iraqi Freedom or Operation Enduring Freedom that I was a part of ever hearing about war bonds. I mean, what did you have to sacrifice here at home to make sure that we had our supplies over there?
Right.
Nothing. We want to make sure that it's as comfortable as possible for everybody involved.
Yeah.
And that means we want to make sure that big business gets its opportunity to make everybody as comfortable as possible while this is going on.
Mm-hmm. And like, if I can just share too, from like a civilian mindset, I now, a little bit older, wiser, and more mature, feel a sense of ignorance that I had and not knowing like the full scope of, and does anyone ever really know at the time, right? But like still having a sense now of what's happening in the world in that way, like, it's kind of like,
and it stagnates. World Wars I and II were, this is an enemy, it's objective, here's what we need to do to win, that's what we do, we win it, and we move on. Now it becomes this politically motivated, we need to go over there and do something, action committee. They come up with that. By the time the quote-unquote other side is in power, now they've come up with something else that we as citizens are focused on. And give it a few years, we've forgotten about the fact that there's even a war going on. It's become such a kind of a back burner thing. You occasionally hear about it, maybe if a relative dies. But for the most part, it's been too much time for me to even remember why I got into this in the first place, why we're fighting it in the first place, things that changed, things that I'm getting weird information, that fog of war to begin with. I'm just going to have to trust that somebody out there knows when the right time is for us to declare mission accomplished on an aircraft carrier and send everybody home. That won't last for another 7 years after that aircraft carrier mission accomplished speech. I mean, it is no longer something that is done, in my opinion, out of a need of defense. It is of a constitution or an ideal. It is done in defense of the United States economy and the Western way of life. And we did have to sacrifice the economy and the Western way of life, that would be detrimental to war. We would say, well, we don't want that. So the people that make these decisions want to make sure that we have both at the same time. You can volunteer and go over there if you want. You'll be comfortable. You'll be a hero. You'll be great. Trust me, you're doing something that's important that everybody will celebrate whenever it's finally done. But if you don't want to, don't worry about it too much. You can stay comfortable. You can continue. You don't have to change very much at all for your own lifestyle. You don't have to do any reflections as to what we had done to provoke any of these other countries that may not like us very much. And just go on about our consumer-driven, entertained, distracted life.
It is an interesting phenomenon now of how we have such convenience, right? You can go to the grocery, or you can go to your refrigerator, not even the grocery store, open it up and have a wider selection than the wealthiest of emperor ever had, right? But what has that resulted in from not just, say a military recruiting standpoint, right? But just from the general populace, just from a perspective of consciousness, right?
I think there's a listlessness, if that's the right term. Kind of a, everybody's kind of, there's an autopilot that comes into play there.
And
if you're not struggling every day for your own survival.
Right. And there is a great distraction that's sought, within that convenience, right? Like, why should I have to worry about all these bigger issues when life is so easy and so comfortable and I have everything on demand, right? It's very misleading. I had a thought. This just kind of came into my head very, very, very soon before the pandemic became a thing in 2020. I was just like, wow, life is really easy. I need food, I go to the grocery store. I don't have to grow it or raise it myself, right? I can just go to the grocery store. I have a job. I have money. I can just give that money to buy the food. Like, I have insurance. Insurance covers medical bills, things like this, right? Like, if someone gets hurt, well, then I go to the hospital and I don't have to worry about paying that. It's like, this all seems so fragile. This all seems so, to a degree, removed from these systems that are already solidly in place within reality. I'm talking about things like, the biosphere, the noosphere, right? Like they have their own way of working, and human consciousness is like figuring out, plugging into the larger concept of consciousness, not to get too philosophical here for a second. And we are finding more of that homeostasis, more of that rhythm, more of that harmony that we can be in living in a more conscious lifestyle, right? So anyway, that was just my reflection I had pre-pandemic, and then, a couple days or weeks later or whatever, boom, it all happens. But
and even as painful for some families and terrifying for others, and anxiety driving as it was to live through the pandemic, think of how much easier things have gotten now.
Oh,
How many people don't even need to go to work?
Yeah.
We had to figure out how to basically sit at home to do our jobs.
you
So
don't need to
now
grocery shop anymore.
you don't have to grocery shop anymore.
You don't even have to go to a store to pick up clothes. You can order all that online, and you can even buy it free, try it on for a week, and then send it back if it doesn't fit you or you don't like it.
And if you want to get away from that idea that somehow you're just a spoiled rich kid with way too much free time and way too much money on your hands, you're doing it for global health reasons. I isolate because I don't want to get anybody else sick.
Yeah.
Even though I'm not seeing any signs, I might pass something along through handing somebody real money instead of tap my card and walk away.
Having no symptoms is one of the symptoms, so it's,
I suppose. That could be.
It was really quite crazy how there was such a materialistic, and understandably so, right? People are naturally afraid when something so unexpected happens in the world. But it was such a materialistic of a perspective that people took in terms of how we address this, right? There was nothing of the reality of social connection that was addressed. Like, oh, sure, you can FaceTime your friends and family and stuff, but we are quantum energetic beings, right? We exist through this exchange of energy that is neither created nor destroyed. And to think that, just to stay in place and separate and not acknowledge, as a matter of fact, almost like kind of like shame that connectivity, right? Really crazy.
Yeah.
Really crazy too. And even, the as a Christian, right, the goodness of the body.
Yeah.
It's not perfect, but it is built to heal. You get a cut on your finger and it will pus and scab and heal, and you get something within yourself too that is traumatized or damaged. It is inclined on a trajectory towards healing. Do we seek that in weird ways sometimes? Sure. Unhealthy ways? Yes. But ultimately, that is a disposition towards wholeness and healing, right? And I mean, that's pretty Teilhardian in terms of, what you're talking about, in terms of you finding the similarity between your own experiences in war, where it was really this journey of personal growth, self-discovery, maturation of consciousness, a sense of maybe coming into that larger whole or sense of community in consciousness, right? Where there is also, as a part of that entering and being welcomed into that community, a sense of anxiety, a sense of needing to do something, a sense of urgency, right?
Yeah.
Because at that level, that's what it's about. Every action that I'm going to do today should have an intentionality behind it. And I know that, some consciousness researchers will say, well, 95% of our waking actions are actually in a subconscious state, right? We're just operating out of habit and whatnot. Sure, for a lot of people, I bet, but that's not what Teilhard is referring to with the ultra-human.
Right.
And what you're referring to in terms of your own realizations, your own expansion of consciousness.
I have to wonder, when they pull out stats like that, how many of their individuals are master meditators or prayerful
Right.
or hesychists
Right.
or Norbertines, or there is something to be said about devoting yourself to the self-discipline, the inner stillness, the peace, where you can be receptive to growth within yourself, change, development, maturation, lessons. That you won't be able to get if your entire life is spent staring at entertainment until you, or stare at the entertainment, procreate, then get sideswiped by your children's lives for the second half of yours, and then, try to entertain yourself some more until you die after retirement. There's what's the greater value that we're giving to the human organism in that being our model for a full life? I think that Teilhard's devotion to the Mass and his yearning to say the Mass when he wasn't able to and he just didn't have the time, but his devotion to that is similar to my devotion at that time to a Sufi initiate meditation. So it's a 20 breath meditation, super thorough. It was one of those that an author, local author, had written a book while I was working at Borders. He and I chatted. He seemed like he was teaching at a Lutheran college, but he was a Sufi practitioner, which is a mystical Islam for anybody for anybody who doesn't know what Sufism is. After 9/11, I came across a book called Paths to the Heart. Didn't read it until I was deploying, but in preparation for deploying, this is a book it's collected of scholars from the Sufi tradition and the Orthodox Hesychist tradition. I didn't know what any of those meant at the time, but I knew that it was Islam and Christianity in dialogue. They had planned it before 9/11. It was supposed to occur shortly after. Once 9/11 happened, they had some scholars that said, no, I can't do this. Other scholars said, this absolutely has to be done now. Right. So I think it brought the timeline up a little bit.
Yeah.
Highly recommend it. Such a great book about that interiority and the difference between that spiritual fullness that you get from prayer or meditation or the liturgy or a devotion to sort of Teilhard's journey into the within, the Christic within himself, that he never exhausted. He spent his entire life continually able to plumb the depths of his own connection to Christ.
Right.
And prayer has the ability to give that to you if you put it into habit. In that Sufi meditation, the last of it's structured so that there's 4 breaths of 5 each, all with different sort of visualizations and a way to perceive the energy moving through your body. The last one of which is the air breath, in through the mouth, out through the mouth. But on the inhale, you were to feel the air expanding into your lungs and really try to visualize the fact that your blood is taking that air to every cell, every single cell in your body. And then as you exhale, you try to really feel that air compressing along the outside of your body. So if you put that into practice, as I did in Iraq, because I had time, I suppose, eventually you recognize that boundary line between self and other, even with every breath, really kind of dissolves. You just, your eye isn't good enough to see just how porous you really are. But the drawing in of substance from the universe around you and the hug of the air, the universe saying it'll be okay, really helped. And I was just I had an opportunity. I said, okay, every time I'm going to go to the gym every day, I'm going to do this 20 breath meditation every day before I go to sleep. And it took 4, 6, 9 months before I was able to really see the difference it made. So every night, just like your prayer routine, every day you go, I really need to say that again.
Well, that's why it's a practice, right?
And then you look back at how many years and wow, that wouldn't have happened if I wouldn't have done it every single day.
And even how practice can evolve, over time. Like you take Teilhard's own saying of the Mass, and then eventually you have the Mass on the world. And, that in itself is very impactful and speaks so much about his own life. So something you've talked about is this, this expansion of consciousness that you had while on the front. Is this something that your fellow soldiers will comment on, that you guys would talk about, would kind of come up, or?
No. It's something that I think in the 18 years, 17 years it's been since then. Those who I've maintained relationships with, you get into some of those discussions a little further.
Yeah. Not kind of while you're in the moment.
Not
though.
something that. Now, at the same time, I was a truck driver, so it was myself, one other driver, and you're stuck in a cab together for 2 weeks.
Right.
There's no radio.
So in that sort of scenario,
You know? So
but
you just gotta
otherwise, I
fill
would
the void.
imagine you're more in the place of, like you said, is the gear all in order? Is the mission on
Right.
track? Worrying about all these other things that
Get
take
everything
priority
you need
over.
done, and then television.
Let's talk about the expansiveness of the universe, man. Like,
Yeah, exactly. Hey, now that we got a second, we might die tomorrow. Hey, you ever thought about what it all meant?
like, why are we even here?
Why are we
right?
here? No, I made that my own prerogative. I don't know that I really sought it out much from other soldiers. It was just my thing, my routine. I see a lot of similarities in Teilhard in his seeking isolation so that he could write, so that he could, anybody that was in my tent, I was the only one that didn't have a television. There were, 8 of us in there, so 8 of us, 7 televisions, except for Jason. He's just got this bookshelf. What a weirdo. And every day I actually went through Genesis for the first time, line by line. I read all the nonfiction I can get my hands on. I would just do everything I could to have those moments of isolation, prayerful, meditative, reflective.
Do they provide
comfort.
a library over there for you guys? Or
There are MWR tents at everywhere. Yes, every used book in America gets sent overseas on behalf of our troops, and I think I'm the only one that read any of them. So I felt great. I had no problems going and just pilfering.
Yeah.
Every base that I went to, I would just go and ransack their MWR tents and see what nonfiction I could find.
Nice.
Found some good reads.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah. Other than that, no. There's plenty of bootlegged DVDs. And that's about your entertainment.
Yeah,
That's what you do.
For sure.
And now me being me, I was the kid that was angry because we had air conditioning. It's 120 degrees outside. You're melting, and people are dying at 4 a.m. because they decided to go for a run or something. And I'm thinking, boy, I'm not suffering enough. This isn't real army. This is what I trained for. This is a waste of taxpayer money. Stick me out in the middle of the boonies. Make me really fight. Just stupid.
Instead of the creature comforts of home. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But those creature comforts are definitely offered to our servicemen and women overseas.
Oh, sure.
At top dollar.
Yeah, and I would imagine that can maybe make it challenging as a service person, because then you're, balancing this sense of the front and what it takes to be totally present within that, when then after the mission and all goes well enough, you can go back to your tent and turn on your air and watch a TV show or whatever. It's challenging, right?
That definitely, yes. That was more of a challenge the first tour. The second tour I was with the largest special operations mission since Vietnam. And I would fly out to Green Beret team safe houses. So I'm not a Green Beret, I'm just a support. But I would fly out to their team house and just live with them for a week or 2 at a time, and then fly to a different one, fly to a different one, fly to a different one. And they had their creature comforts as well, obviously. I felt at that time I'd matured enough and thought it was pretty well deserved for some of these guys what little creature comforts they could have. But you were in a village where some of the villagers thought you were Russian.
Yeah.
I mean, they had no idea. Who's
that far
occupying us now? Okay, what do we do to get what we can? Okay, great. We'll just wait it out until you leave. Just like we've done for the last 4,000 years,
Yeah.
So it was a different... the creature comforts offered in Afghanistan are not as easily provided as they are in Iraq. In Iraq, you have a seaport and you have a flat desert to go and drive all these supplies up and deliver on.
Sure.
In Afghanistan, there's no logistics. There's no
There's
logistics structure at all.
Mountain ranges and
yeah,
stuff,
mountain
too, so
ranges
that
all
can
over.
make-
There's like one route that might be clear between Kabul and Kandahar. One road, other than that, it's a dirt trail. It's a few little, paved roads every once in a while, but no, it's a hard-packed dirt road
Right.
in the middle of nowhere. And this is some you might want to edit out. I don't know if maybe that might have been a little more bang for the buck if we really pushed for Iraq and the weapons of mass destruction instead of just sticking around with this Afghanistan that we can't really flood full of contractors and comforts and creature comforts and glory for our U.S. service members.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the plans were drawn up the decade prior in Iraq. Let's get over there.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like, and now we face this challenge today with like COVID and stuff and government overreach, but it's like you speak to a topic and you're like, oh, conspiracy theorists, right? Well, in this case, we have the
this is
advantage
business.
of, right, how many years being removed from this and
Exactly.
the paperwork and the books being published and the politicians being more transparent and servicemen like yourself coming out and sharing their own experience.
Yeah,
Like, it's not
yeah.
conspiracy, guys.
20 years later, we get a lot more information. I mean, declassification only lasts 20 years, I believe.
Yeah.
Or like classification, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I think, it has to be reviewed.
Right.
So the information is definitely out there. And yes, it was good business for some entities that were influential to make sure that we didn't just stay in Afghanistan.
So, despite facing these realities, right? War, death, violence, loss in World War I in Teilhard's case, right? In your own case, you experienced those things, yet there's also like this added layer of human, what's the word I'm looking for? Meddling, like undermining to a degree, right? Where it becomes more about contracts and business. And
I think there's, at the same time, despite all of that, the moments that can only be explained if you have faith in deity become so much more apparent. Despite all of this, I still get to have a real connection with, synchronicity. I know that your PhD, you brought Jung into the conversation, and I enjoyed your work so much. But Jung had a term called synchronicity. It was a timeliness that is inexplicable.
right.
For whatever reason, that became so much more apparent to me while I was in Iraq. The opportunities, some of them were just opportunities. I had been reading this Sufi meditation book. For whatever reason, they had a phrase that was transliterated, so it was written in English so that you could sound it out and it would sound Arabic. But the phrase was La ilaha illallah, and it's the way in which all of Islam starts its prayer. There is no God but God. I had a little kid, probably about 5 years old, and we're sitting waiting to go into a base, and my window was down, I was pulling security and just hanging out. He came out in as loud a voice as he could. He said, Allah says you, right? Big beep right there. And I had been given this phrase like the week prior, maybe 2 weeks prior. So I was able to turn to him and say, La ilaha illallah. And I'm probably butchering that. My Arabic's a little rusty, but the kid's face, there was this genuine moment where he just did everything he possibly could to spiritually just vomit on me out of this rage. There's this soldier in my front yard that I didn't bring him there. Sure. I can't do anything against him, but I don't like that he's here in my front yard. And I was able to say, there is no God but God to this, and just watch his brain kind of misfire a little bit, and then he was begging for candy like the next second. It was like that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I would be reading books, and we'd be driving through the towns that I'd be reading about for the first time ever. I'd be reading the names and I'd be like, oh, wait a minute, hey, look, wait, hold on. Aren't we going to, and
Yeah.
the conflict between Shia and Sunni, and I was trying to figure that out and reading the history of that.
Mm-hmm.
We're driving through the towns on the day that I'm reading it. We just, little things like that came up where, if anything, I was able to just let go and let God.
Yeah.
Right? In a way, feel more like a character in God's dream than to be concerned with what Jason Willits really wants, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that you might be in control of that outcome.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or, and relinquish it. Like,
Right.
I didn't plan to read this book on this day necessarily. There was hundreds of thousands of different events that happened that brought up to this moment where all of a sudden I'm reading the right book at the right time or having the right conversation with the right person. And that really became apparent to me.
So does that speak to kind of your spiritual growth as you've journeyed through Teilhard? And
I put my trust in it, and it's worked out just fine for me so far in many ways.
Yeah. And you mentioned something before in terms of like the synchronicities, right? And like not seeing them, then all of a sudden you see them. Mm-hmm. And that's something that people will comment on after, like, you know, what they might classify as a spiritual experience or some huge existential experience, maybe a near-death experience, you know, maybe a really impactful retreat they go on or something like that, and a pilgrimage, something to that effect, right? And it's like afterwards we see the world with new eyes, where there's just all this connectivity that previously wasn't there because maybe we were too caught up in our own stuff, right?
Exactly.
We're too worried about what our IRA should look like as opposed to what it actually is. Or I don't know any of these things, right, that you're talking about in the civilian mindset versus that is necessary on the front. And, you know, how there is a tension, yet maybe that tension to a degree is necessary because that's kind of like where the growth comes from, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that if you're going to have faith in synchronicity, if you're ever going to have faith in those little God winks, you're going to have to notice them first, right? You're not going to notice them if you're comfortable.
Right.
You're not going to notice them if you're distracted. But you have to stay uncomfortable and undistracted for long enough that they happen regularly enough that you can then have the faith to say, well, maybe this really is kind of a thing. Maybe
I'm
not
paying attention to.
Yeah, maybe it wasn't just a one-off that this perfect timing only happened this one time.
Right.
It tends to happen more often the more aware you are of it happening already.
Yes. Yep.
And you can't do that while you're comfortable.
No. Yeah, what is
or
it?
Distracted.
Comfort zones are for comfort; they're not for growth, right? So it's an easy way to look at it.
Great way to think of it.
Yeah. So in terms of, you know, the ATA and having Jason on this podcast, he is our first member who has been on, in terms of a member that has gotten really self-motivated to be plugged into our organization. And I would encourage our other members to, you know, to get involved to the degree that Jason has in terms of stepping up, saying, hey, I'd like to help with this, or, you know, I'd like to try and submit something. And you know, all of our stuff is ultimately peer-reviewed, yet, you know, we are more than happy to accept submissions and take people through that process. So you know, before I get into that stuff, you know, Jason, just would you share with our audience a little bit about how you came to be involved with the ATA?
I think
because it was super organic from my perspective. If you would just kind of share what that was like.
No, it really was. So, you know, Teilhard's name came up in a couple of books. Oh, cool. He seems interesting. When I got back from Afghanistan, I was medically evacuated and moved away from my immediate family, my immediate friends. So I had to kind of restart my social circle. Mm-hmm. But I had an opportunity to say, okay, well, what kind of social circle do I want to build? And so I got involved with Ecumenical Campus Ministries on K-State, and they had a book club of retired physics professors, pastors. Like, it was a science and religion in this little group, all these professionals all coming together, and they'd been doing it for years, and I geeked out and said, that's great. One of the first books we read was The Emergence of Christ by Ilya. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, wow, you know, This Teilhard guy keeps coming up in this readings, and yeah, I think that was kind of the impetus to learn that there is an association out there that, you know, Oh, wow, cool. So subscribed, became an annual member. Dr. John Hunt, Jack's, it was right when it was 2011. It was the first Teilhard studies I got was his drama. And when he was first really talking about the anticipatory vision that oh man. And I fell in love, said, okay, cool. And thought, man, I'm going to save up in some year. I'm going to travel to New York to the theological seminary or where we had the annual events.
Right.
Then, man, just 1 year, I'm going to save up some money and I'm going to get to there. I can't wait. It'll be great, And then a decade goes by, and I had an opportunity where it was much like when I was medevac. Okay, I have an opportunity to just choose where do I want to move. Well, I thought, okay, well, Philadelphia would be cool because the ATA is close by. Chestnut Hill's close, Villanova's close. You're close. I'm a huge fan of Sir John Templeton as well. Templeton Foundation's right there. I was like, man, you know what? Let's shoot for that. My fiance is a large animal vet, so Verziana said, okay, well, let's look into. And she looked at UPenn and the new Bolton Center, greatest horse hospital in the country, if not the world. And hey, they've got a fellowship that she really thought about. So we just kind of put all of our, we just thought, well, let's make this happen. Okay. And then at that time, I had, thanks to COVID, realized how powerful social media can be. Took a course called Unlocking LinkedIn that is offered by Janae Casca, who is a LinkedIn guru for 12 years. Great. It was a great course, but at that time, Sister Kathy's book club had kind of gone online because of COVID, and you were doing a lecture that May on Teilhard, and that I was able to attend online, and so the convergence of society evolving into the newer sphere, more so in a way that people across the country can attend these things. More accessible, allowed me to answer that opportunity with, hey, you know what? I'm going to get in front of these people before I have my PhD and I become a best-selling author. And my goal was like someday when I'm like 65 and I'm like retired and like well-known somehow, somewhere, then I'll be able to be like, hey, so I've been a member for a few years and I really like what you guys do. And,
you heard it here first, folks.
Finally, I felt like I had to earn something in order to get on the radar of all these great minds that I'd been reading for years. So we just made that opportunity happen. I think I'm grateful that you have seen enthusiasm and work. I personally see Teilhard and what he offers the world, what he offered to us, what he influences, how he influences so many people.
Yeah.
There's so many people that say they I think honestly they just don't go through the work of really diving in enough to really digest it.
It's hard.
It is.
It takes a lot of time.
So our call to action as those who have been inspired by that is to make Teilhard accessible.
Yes.
Right? Yep. We make Teilhard accessible. He is a way of looking at the world that the world desperately, desperately needs right now.
Yeah.
So it's any effort I can make for the ATA, I see it as nothing compared to what I've already gotten from Teilhard himself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, all the great minds in the ATA that are publishing great books that I've also read.
Well, it sounds to me like, in the simplest sense, you're still answering that call to service at the front, right? This is something that I feel like I'm a part of. How can I be a more active member, contributor, right? And then, boom, here you are doing a podcast. You've submitted something for the Terra Perspective. So, you're inspiring to me in being a board member of the American Tarot Association and seeing the kind of energy that's out there and the willingness to get involved. So I'm hoping that you're inspiring to some of our other members and potential members that might be out there too. And who knows, we'll come across this podcast, we'll listen to it, we'll watch it. And who knows who might already be like yourself coming across Teilhard's name in their studies, in their professional lives, wherever, and they might be putting that together.
Yeah.
And it's not like this is Teilhard's vision, right? It's something that he was able to articulate,
Right.
but it is that larger vision of the Christic, or of, if we really want to go there, within any true religion, this vision is there, right? Of unity, bringing together in a sense where there's not loss so much from the identity, but there's a gain of sense of self, of how one is affirmed, of how one is a part, right? Now, of course, we can get into the theological idiosyncrasies, right? But to make people feel included, like they are a part, like they are a vital part of this vitality of the planet that we experience through evolution, through the ebbs and the flows of our daily lives, the high points, the low points, the struggles, the triumphs, right? These get amplified on the front, yet their importance is no less in the mundane day-to-day. It's our initiative, really, right? Our prerogative to bring that sense of, I don't want to say urgency, because yes, that's part of it, but it's more than that, right? It's a sense of presence, perhaps.
Yeah.
Because if you're fully present, you're aware of, this is the only thing that matters right now, and I'm working in the problems, and I'm working towards solutions, and I'm acknowledging that this is difficult. I'm acknowledging that there's a part of me that's anxious. I'm acknowledging that I feel this sense of urgency, like this has to get done, yet I'm acknowledging that I'm going to take the time that I need to do it, because I'm going to do it intentionally and to the best of my ability, and how I've been taught to do it and how I know it, right?
And you can only do that so far.
Yeah.
You have to wait patiently until you're prepared to take it any further. You can on the back end, you can prepare yourself as much as you can.
Yeah.
But often it's answering the call that comes your way rather than thinking to yourself when you're 6 years old, hey, I can't wait to go and tour Iraq. I mean, that just wasn't what, I thought I was going to be more of a jungle war, I was kind of like, what, they're sending us to sand? That's not cool. How are we going to find any cover concealment over there? I think that if you're not, I don't know, I think service is just so hardwired into me maybe that I have a hard time figuring out what people do if they're not being of service. Like, I don't understand, like, it makes the time go faster.
Right.
1, 2, you get all these great side quests helping other people.
That's true.
Seriously, you get to learn so much. You get to learn so much just asking your peers, hey, what can I help you do today? Well, I'm going to do this. Well, I have no idea how to do that. Cool, side quest. You get to learn it, right?
It's true.
In the end, who doesn't want to just, if you are willing to believe that you are a creature,
Yeah.
created by the universe or created by a deity, if you're willing to believe that there is enough of a unique relationship between you and the universe that you can call it personal, that you can say, I answer to a personal God.
Right.
Why wouldn't you want at the end to hear, well done, my good and faithful servant, and get your little pat on the head? I mean, really, maybe that's it. Maybe I'm no more evolved than Kaka, my border collie, right? But that's where I find my greatest sense of fulfillment is in that service, because it can fill up your day, it provides some great side quests, and then after it's over, whenever it's over, all I can hope for is, well done, my good and faithful servant. And that's all the satisfaction I ever need.
Jason, thank you for sharing today, for coming on the podcast, for your service as well, and for hopefully inspiring some more members and non-members who have stumbled across this podcast to be a part of this, to be of service, and to get involved. There's lots of ways you can get involved. We have presence on Facebook, we're on Instagram, YouTube. The podcast is available on Spotify. So we're going to be putting out some small groups in the fall and winter here coming up. And of course, we have the October event, which the announcement is out on social media for in terms of celebrating the 100-year anniversary of Mass on the World. So
internationally, right?
That's right. Yeah,
we
this
are
is a
like. I mean, I understand the ATA is a great thing for the United States.
Yeah. But the vision
But
is so
we
much
have,
bigger
right?
than that.
I mean-
Yeah, so there's a French organization called the Friends of Teilhard de Chardin, and they're going to be coming out to the United States. It's a collaborative effort between the ATA and the Friends of Teilhard, so it's a lot to look forward to. We have all great speakers lined up. It's going to be in person as well as some live stream options, so it will be accessible to a lot of people. You can go on the website, teilharddechardin.org, to find more out about that. We'll post some links in the show notes below. So thanks so much for tuning in today. Jason, thanks again for being with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the future.
Well, thank you for having me, and thanks for paying your taxes.
Peace.